Was he looking for me before? Oh, dear. You want me to go? Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear you. No improvisation.
That's fine. Go ahead. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears, everyone. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or in short, as we say, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Great to have all of you today. I want to begin, as usual, by welcoming all that you bring to this place, all of your unique beliefs, background, your lifestyle, your experiences, all that make you who you are. Isn't that an affirming message? To get in a church, to hear that each Sunday? Well, it's true. True for all of those of you here, as well as those who are streaming with us this morning. You're equally as welcome and appreciated and embraced. So, welcome to one and all. I do want to say Happy Father's Day. Thank you. Thank you. I noticed some of the I want to say children, some of our kids, but of course you're not children or kids anymore, but are home this weekend, so including my daughter Cassidy for the week. Good to see you, Cassidy. Thank you for coming home for Father's Day. Cassidy handed me a card earlier. Can I read it? This is from a company called Because You're Ridiculously something, adjective. But the card says, "You the man." And it says, "The old man, but still the man. Happy Father's Day. Thanks for not only bringing me into the world, but for making it a better place to live in too. Love you, Pops, Cass." Thank you, Cass. Well, happy Father's Day to all of you who are fathers, and I always like to think about on this day the people who have fathered me in the world. My own dad wasn't really the best father, but boy, I've had a lot of great fathers, and they not all men either. There's a lot of wonderful women out there who have fathered me too. So I hope whoever brought that energy into your life that you can be grateful this morning. I do want to say a word on behalf of the immigrant children and their parents who have been separated due to the actions of our own government on this day. difficult to celebrate Father's Day and have integrity without mentioning what's going on where children are being separated from their parents and of course causing great turmoil and anxiety in the lives of parents and children. So let us hope and work to stop this as soon. And that's what Father Energy is about, right? Protecting people from abuse. Let's take a few moments to greet one another on that happy note. I hope that you will say, I couldn't segue. I'm sorry. I tried to segue. Couldn't do it. Thank you, and I hope you'll stay around after the service to visit more with one another during our social hour. But let's move forward now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Our opening words are adapted from Kathleen McTeague. You who are broken-hearted, who woke today with the winds of despair whistling through your mind, come in. You who are brave but wounded, limping through life and hurting with every step, come in. You who are fearful, who live with shadows hovering over your shoulders, come in. This place is sanctuary, and it is for you. You who are filled with happiness, whose abundance overflows, come in. You who walk through your world with lightness and grace, who awoke this morning with strength and hope, you who have everything to give, come in. This place is your calling, a riverbank to channel the sweet waters of your life, the place where you are called by the world's need. Here we offer in love. Here we receive in gratitude. Here we make a circle from the great gifts of breath, attention, purpose. Come in.
Four times a year, we have a little ritual in our service to mark the solstices and the equinox times of the year, and coming upon us now is the summer solstice, which will be in midweek next week. And so today we are shifting. You'll see our summer banner on the wall to your right, and we are going to sing our little ritual song, Chant for the Seasons. So please rise as you're willing and able. Number 73, Chant for the Seasons, summer verse.
Good morning. Can I have all the young and the young at heart join me? Ooh, tie-dye, I like it. Violet. Hello. Is the mic on? Great. Sophia, can I have you hold this for me? Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, just hold that for me. Those are my visual aids. So how many of you like to be right? How many of you are okay being wrong? How many of you have never been wrong? Ever? Wives, yes, wives. So sometimes we think that we are wrong about something, and it actually turns out we're right. So in the 1960s, there was a man, and he worked for a company, and his whole job was to make really strong glue or adhesive. So strong that it would keep airplanes together. That was his whole job. He was a chemical engineer. Guess what? He tried to make this glue, and you know what happened? It was really weak. It did not work the way he expected. In fact, when he would try to stick something to it, it would just peel off, and then you could stick it again, it would peel off, and he thought, well, this is not what I wanted. And the funny thing is that it didn't leave any sticky residue on his fingers. It was not like the glue that he intended to make for airplanes, right? And so he thought it was a complete failure, right? And he thought, well, maybe we can use it for something else. Maybe we can make like a bulletin board and spray or the glue on the bulletin board, and you could take paper and you could stick it to the board, and then you don't have to use staples or tacks. And he told this to the people in the company, and they're like, no, that's not a good idea. People never buy that. So his idea kind of went away, got shelved. Oh well, he was sort of a failure with that thing. But then, and this is where I'll borrow my book, Sophia, but then a few years later, a guy in that company who happened to sing in the choir, he happened to sing in the choir, and he kept having this problem because whenever he opened up his choir book, he would have his pages marked and his darn paper kept flying out. And he said, I just wish I had a piece of paper that would stick to my book. And he remembered that his friend in the company had come up with something. And he went back to him and said, hey, I have an idea. Instead of having a big bulletin board, what if you just put that glue on paper and you make it the kind of glue that sticks like that, a little paper thing. And they tried it out, and guess what? People loved it, which is why we have Post-its. Post-its. How many of you use Post-its every day? Yes, I have about 1,000 of these in my office, right? So he thought, that man who made that glue thought that he was wrong, but it turned out he was right, because it ended up working for something. And you can each take one if you want. Take a Post-it. How about times when you think that you're right, but it turns out you're wrong? Yeah, I was like, oh, yeah. And I'll borrow this for a second. So a long time ago, there were some very important leaders. This is about 400 years ago, and they thought, and they were absolutely certain, that the world, which is this marble, we are the world, right? They were absolutely certain that the world was the center of the whole universe, and everything else went around it. Like the sun went around our world. We were so important that we were at the center. But then what happened? A man named Galileo, who was an astronomer, so he studied the stars and the solar system, he said, actually, you know what? I've proven that the world is not at the center, but the sun is at the center of our solar system, and we move around it. And those leaders, you know what they said? No, that can't be, because the Bible says that we are the center. And he went, no, but I proved it. And they said, no, we're going to do something bad to you if you don't take that back. So you know what they forced him to do? They forced him to pretend it was all a lie, that he didn't get that right, and he had to live in his house for the rest of his life. But guess what? 350 years later, those people, that organization, they said, you know what, we were actually wrong. Turns out we were wrong. And he was right. And even though in his lifetime no one ever told him that he was right, years later they said, yeah, we're sorry about that. We got it wrong. And you know what? I think we might be regressing because we have a leader right now who thinks that the world revolves around him. Isn't that an apt representation? So the point is that sometimes we think that we're right, and it turns out we're wrong. Sometimes we're wrong, and it turns out we're right. And sometimes we'll just never know, and that's okay. Right? Let's sing the kids out.
Today we have a special collection. If you open your orders of service, you'll find a small envelope. Please use this if you wish to donate, and don't worry about licking it shut. We do reuse the envelopes. Our special collection this morning will benefit Ministers Sharing Fund. This fund provides emergency assistance to members and friends of our church impacted by job loss, emergency health issues, or unexpected financial difficulty. Your gifts to this fund represent grace, mercy, and justice to those right here in our midst. If this ministry speaks to you, please consider giving generously to this important UUCS fund. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
Om Namo Gurudev Namo is a protection chant, and it's loosely translated as bowing to the divine light within me. So, you. So in a sense, we're honoring that life force vitality in each of us. So if it resonates with you, please feel free to join along.
Susan and Todd, thank you again so much. Now kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our thoughts this morning. I want to begin with a candle for Devon Grayerville's grandson, Jack, who's found out leukemia has recurred. Thinking of you, Devon, and your entire family. Candle for Patty Vedelove, who is recovering from surgery she had on Thursday and appreciates cards and calls. Luba Johnston, who you may remember from last week, in ICU, is back home, recovering from actually a brain bleed, so they seem to have things under control, but she's still undergoing treatment and appreciates all of your thoughts and those who contacted her. And then a candle celebrating the 45th anniversary this month of Nancy and Del Avery, so congratulations to them. You don't need to applaud. They were here for a service, so it's nice. They appreciate that for sure. So let's take a moment of silence on behalf of others we might be thinking of, and as always, you're welcome to name them aloud at this time if you'd like. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, hold in our community.
We move into meditation this morning. I invite you to breathe deeply, find a comfortable posture. An excerpt from Whistling Swans by Mary Oliver. Do you bow your head when you pray, or do you look up into that blue space? Make your choice. Prayers fly from all directions. And don't worry about what language you use. God, no doubt, understands them all. Even when the swans are flying north and making such a ruckus of noise, God is surely listening, understanding.
My reading today are a couple of lines from Bertrand Russell's book, The Art of Philosophizing. The first thing to realize if you wish to become a philosopher is that most people go through life with a whole world of beliefs that have no sort of rational justification, and that one person's world of beliefs is apt to be incompatible with another person's, so that they cannot both be right. People's opinions are mainly designed to make them feel comfortable. Truth, for most people, is a secondary consideration. Thank you both so much. It's just beautiful morning because of your beautiful music. It really, for me, just seems to ground me to my connection to the earth and being present. Thank you. Had more than one person come up to me after the first service, say, you need to have those people back. Most definitely. I know you're familiar with the phrase, ignorance is bliss. It originates from an 18th century poem by Thomas Gray, Ode to a Distant Prospect of Eden College, in which the Irish poet contemplates the value of telling his innocent children of the suffering and unhappiness they're sure to someday experience. Thought would destroy their paradise, he concludes, but not where ignorance is bliss. 'Tis folly to be wise. That's how his poem ends, suggesting that sometimes it's better not knowing the truth because we're happier without it. Or as Jack Nicholson more succinctly put it in his 1992 film, A Few Good Men, you know this. You can't handle the truth. Very poor impersonation of Jack Nicholson, but in some instances, as Gray's poem or Nicholson's iconic line, at least I thought it was iconic before I spoke before this group, illustrate people are kept in the dark by others, presumably for their own good. And when such ignorance is imposed upon them, it's patronizing and it's paternalistic. There are just some things that people in power believe others shouldn't know. They justify such deceit by insisting that it's for their own good, to prevent them unnecessary anxiety because they couldn't handle it. In most of these cases, however, I suspect they are really protecting themselves from others knowing the truth. When, for example, governments and governors assert alternate facts about their number of supporters, or as Trump is now calling them, his people and his followers, or forbid government employees from talking about, say, global warming, or even mentioning the term, they aren't protecting the public, nor childhood innocence. They're protecting the status quo, while harming the public and the children who shall inherit a much hotter earth process. It's for their own good, they convince themselves, concealing and manipulating the facts in the process, ignoring the reality that they are acting in their own self-interest. Yet as I understand it, the meaning of ignorance isn't so much about being kept in the dark as it is about choosing to remain. It's not just being unaware of the facts, it's intentionally avoiding them. There is a willfulness to it. The Latin word from which ignorance derives is better translated as disregard, or to pass by without taking note. You know? Kind of thing. Blinders. Unlike stupidity or dumbness, which imply a genuine lack of awareness of not knowing, ignorance refers to knowing the facts and acting like we don't, or to intentionally suppressing knowledge and education so we aren't exposed to information that might conflict with the alternate reality we've already convinced ourselves of. My mind is made up, as the saying goes. Please don't confuse me with the facts. Some of this self-imposed disregard for inconvenient truths I believe is the result of cultural conditioning, and some is the result of our own biology. In developmental psychology, our psychological maturation happens in 3 phases. If that is, we don't get stuck somewhere along the line, if something doesn't prevent us from achieving our full potential as individuals. In short, the 3 phases are the I orientation, the you orientation, and the us orientation. The first phase, the I orientation, is all about what's best for oneself, which is the attitude of small children who must be demanding, sometimes crying and throwing tantrums to receive what they need or want from their caregivers. The you orientation usually emerges between ages 5 and 7 when we realize that we have to share and we have to play by the rules if we want our share and our turn. Playing by the rules, meeting the expectations of others, turns into the law and order morality of adulthood that some people never grow beyond, which means halting our maturation process so that we remain included and in good standing among others. It means sacrificing our individual uniqueness and authenticity. The us orientation recognizes we must fully express ourselves and unfold as individuals, and that our own welfare, our voice, our rights matter, or else we're not meeting our duty to become all that we are. Yet it also recognizes that even as we take responsibility for our own growth and welfare, we cannot do so at the expense of others. That all selves, by virtue of being selves, ourselves and our neighbors' selves, must be respected and must be nourished. Across time, thinkers from various fields have used differing terms for these 3 stages, but their meanings coincide. Buddha called them the aesthetic or indulgent stage, the ascetic or abstinence stage, and finally the middle way that includes compassion, care for all beings, including oneself, and for oneself while including all others. The philosopher Kierkegaard called them the aesthetic stage, the ethical stage, meaning the rule-based stage, and the religious stage, which for him was grounded in unity and justice. They're also reflected in Freud's delineation between the id, the superego, and the ego, and more recently, the child, parent, adult stages of transactional analysis. This triune flow is also presented in psychologist Erich Fromm's treatment of theological development, beginning with the idea that God is like a toddler, selfish and demanding, who easily angers, throws tantrums, and is a black and white punitive thinker. As we mature, we see God more as a loving parent, as a person that we are in relationship with, whom we can please, whose anger we can modulate, and who will continue loving us so long as we obey the rules, so long as we keep the covenant. In the end, if we get there, God isn't a person at all, but our devotion to higher principles once reflected in our religious ideas, like justice and compassion, peace, principles that are universal and ought to be universally applied to everyone. But I still refer the stages outlined by Lawrence Kohlberg in his theory of moral development, referred to simply as pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. In the first, early childhood stage, we are dualistic, or black and white thinkers, authoritarian, punitive, who tend to act in our own interest. By around age 7, through early adulthood, we become more conventional in our thinking, meaning that we are most concerned about what others think of us and tend to obey the rules of our society, even if They are the rules belonging to our rebellious, trend-setting society of peers, to our tribe. Finally, if we get there, the post-conventional stage considers, again, certain principles like justice and compassion and peace that ought to be applied to everyone, including ourselves, no matter where we are or who we're with. I bring developmental psychology up at such length because it's key to understanding how and why we let ourselves get stuck in conventional ways of living, in a law and order, do what is expected, tribal, you-oriented way of thinking that causes us to often to ignore our own evolution, to ignore the larger reality, and to ignore the needs and the rights of those who differ from us. In order to remain included by others, included in the safety and security of our society, our development may become stunted as we refuse to look beyond the limited views of our own culture, may even consider those with different views a threat, treat them as such. This desire to remain included, to be safe and secure at almost any cost, plays well into the self-preservation indicative of most societies and civilizations. You see, civilization is based upon everyone doing what is expected, everyone obeying the rules, everyone thinking and behaving as they are told. Civilization thus thrives upon mid-level, law and order, conventional morality. This means society is constitutionally against the full expression and evolution of the individual. It means to maintain order, the status quo in its own future. It must hinder us from moving beyond our conventional mindset, which it turns out isn't hard to do, because many of us are readily willing to give it all up in order to belong and remain safe and secure. Hence, between being conditioned by society to do as we're expected and our own willingness to ignore truths that threaten what we already believe, we end up with a system of slavery so well designed, said B.F. Skinner, that it does not breed revolt. A system comprised of, as he puts it, or put it, happy slaves, referring to a state in which individuals are conditioned to meet the needs of the status quo, to maintain the existing state of affairs, even to their own detriment, without thought, ignoring almost everything else. From the perspective of evolutionary psychology, furthermore, which seeks to understand human behavior in terms of how it benefits the survival of our species, habitual behavior, including habitual patterns of thinking, lend themselves more to survival, usually, than do erratic or new behaviors with unpredictable outcomes. Some neurologists are now saying the main purpose of human brain is to make predictions. Theory that's being applied AI, which is why we are now beginning to make real strides in the technology of artificial intelligence. And these predictions are based on inductive reasoning, on what that is usually been proven to happen in the past. Hence, we're biologically wired to be a lot more comfortable with the way things always have been than with change, than with trading our tried and tested traditions for new ways with uncertain outcomes. To assure habitual behavior, which again is more likely to keep us alive, not always, but most likely, at least long enough to reach sexual maturation so that we can pass our immortal genes on to new host organisms. Doesn't that make you feel important? Our brains avoid cognitive dissonance, the confusion of many possibilities, through the false feeling of certainty, the belief that we must be right. And this feeling of being sure of ourselves, resulting in habitual patterns of behavior and thinking, is reinforced with a dopamine release to our pleasure centers. That's why being certain feels so good, and why we dislike being proven wrong, which usually doesn't feel very good at all. It feels as good to say, "I told you so," as it feels bad to hear it, right? So whether it's our innate dread of being left out of the support and security of community, or resulting from our ancient survival instincts reinforced by our endocrine systems, part of the human experience seems to involve ignoring, disregarding, passing by without noticing those truths that don't jive with our traditional ways of thinking. The capacity to doubt, the psychologist Theodore Reich once said, and in particular, the ability to doubt for a very long time, is one of the rarest things on the planet. Or as Erich Fromm said, the compulsive quest for certainty, compulsion to be right, is rooted in the need to conquer unbearable doubt. It may be that ignorance is as natural as it is cultural, but it would be a mistake to commit the naturalistic fallacy by presuming it must therefore be good. Because something's natural doesn't mean it's good, right? Hurricanes and tornadoes and floods are natural, but they are disasters. Viruses and bacteria are natural, but some of them can kill us. Considering the current state of affairs, it appears that today's epidemic of ignorance is also proving to be disastrous, deadly. Perhaps nothing makes this case more profoundly than the environmental apocalypse that we're now in, because too many of us continue to ignore the reality of global warming. There's a lot of propaganda in the corporate-controlled media these days still claiming that global warming isn't happening at all, or that scientists can't agree on what's causing it, or that it's part of a natural cycle and there's nothing that we can do about it. Even now, every now and then I should say, something about it does make the headlines. Like a study out just this week, some of you may have heard of, from over 80 scientists from 44 international organizations warning us that Antarctica's ice sheet is melting faster than ever before, adding 240 billion tons of melt to the rising sea every year. Yet with more than 80% of Americans getting our news from television and the internet in a constantly changing news cycle, our aversion to cognitive dissonance, to too many possibilities, goes into hyperdrive. There's too much information bombarding us to remain focused on big issues very long. There's so much news that we can easily shift our attention from these kind of inconvenient truths, ignoring them, disregarding them, passing by them, pretending not to notice, in favor of the news that we prefer to hear and think about, news that doesn't upset the status quo or remind us maybe we need to change our ways. Sea levels are rising. Tweet Donald Trump mocks Prime Minister, Canadian Prime Minister. The government is taking immigrant children from their parents and stacking them in cages. Tweet Roseanne Barr makes an offensive comment. By all social indicators, non-whites in the U.S. are no better off today than they were before the Civil Rights Act. Tweet actor Robert De Niro drops the F-bomb. Israeli military shoots unarmed Palestinians with sniper rifles during peaceful protest. Tweet, a raccoon is climbing a skyscraper in Minnesota. If we prefer not thinking about all the troubling things going on in our world, especially those that counter our own worldview, there's plenty of other possibilities to focus our attention on. Tweet, The Incredible 2's out in theaters now. We've been waiting for that one. No, my daughter has. I'm going to get in trouble when I get home, aren't I? Still, somehow, despite all the distraction and ignorance, our species continues to evolve. Despite placing armed guards at our gates, walls at our borders, and agents hunting immigrant infiltrators at our transportation hubs, we manage to have innovators and outliers in our midst who insist that the world is round, that it orbits around the sun, that it's 4.5 billion years old, and that it's now getting hotter because of human activity. They keep saying things like these until enough of us will listen and finally learn to change our ways. Despite all the stories we're brought up on about big bad wolves, about talking to strangers from strange places with strange ways, some of us welcome the strangers among us. Imagine they might even be angelic messengers with something important to offer us, and offer them sanctuary in our homes and in our churches. Stranger shares the same root as extraneous and simply means one from without. Whether it means one from another place or one who is outside the circle of society because they have different ideas, different ways, or simply look different than most. They are frightening, vilified, oppressed people until enough of us can no longer pass them by without noticing and finally learn to widen our circles of inclusion. How does this happen? How are some able to overcome our cultural and biological predispositions toward ignorance? When I was taking CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, which is a requirement for becoming a Unitarian Universalist minister, I was the only non-Christian in my class, which made me an outlier and stranger, if not strange. Early on, my presence became such a disruption to the entire class that it exploded with anger after I asked a question about the value of what we were doing. Everyone took a turn insulting me for insulting them. One classmate said that I was the most arrogant, heartless person she'd ever met. The director of the program invited me to quit. I told him I was there because I needed to be, and I would leave only if directly asked to do so. Despite the pressure to leave and my wish to be anywhere else, no one actually had the courage to tell me to get out. So I remained. Yahoo! During the semester, which took place in a hospital setting, the program director told me that I look at the world pathologically. Now, he didn't mean that I'm pathological, only that I approach things by considering their pathology, by asking, that is, what's wrong with this picture? Some might call that critical thinking. But I consider his observation more than fair, and to this day I appreciate his insight and actually take pride in admitting that it's true. I'm an outlier, an innovative thinker, and have been most of my life, which has made me a stranger in almost every school I've ever attended, every community I've lived in, every job I've ever held, with the exception of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Thank you. Otherwise known as the Island of Misfit Toys. When I consider what made me like this, what made me a stranger in my own land, among my own people, I think some of it has to do with growing up in an abusive environment. True, the insecurity of growing up abused and neglected can cause us to have extremely rigid beliefs and ways, and even continue those abusive patterns in one's own life. But living with such insecurity can also help one learn to better cope with life's uncertainties and to want to find a better way of living. And that's eventually what happened to me. There are things that make me anxious for sure, but not being left out, not saying things that others disagree with, and not hearing things that I disagree with. Those things don't make me anxious. Majoring in philosophy as a young adult helped me give discipline to these tendencies. I entered college, as many of you know, as a conservative Southern Baptist, believing I had all the major questions to life already answered. But in studying epistemology, the study of truth, I realized that nobody can ever know the truth with absolute certainty. I'm uncertain of that. Through the study of metaphysics, exploring the underlying nature of reality, I realized that we can't even be sure of what's real or not. Is the world material? Is it consciousness? Are we just dreaming? And through the study of ethics, I came to realize we can't even be sure that what we're doing is really the right thing to do or not, and that almost everything we do has some negative repercussions. So that's been my life, learning to live with insecurity and uncertainty. In a world where almost everyone seems to crave security and certainty above all else. I may be a misfit, an outlier, a strange guy to some, but learning to let go of the answers hurled at me by asking what's wrong with them fills my life with wonder, with amazement. Opening my mind and heart to strangers, to those with strange ideas and strange ways, brings me new insights all of the time, and as I continue to assemble this puzzle we call life. And has made me, in the process, a global citizen to all humankind. Letting go of my need to be right and righteous leads me to think beyond just my action, to their consequence. To consider how what I do, whether considered right or wrong by everyone else, will impact the lives of others. Finally, shedding my beliefs in a God who is magically in charge of my life, living with the insecurity and uncertainty of it all has made me a mystic. One who not only lives in the mist, in the mystery, but one who is most comfortable there, not knowing. The true mystics I have known, writes theologian Matthew Fox, have been people who never lost the sense of the child in wonder. The mystic, after all, is the divine child in us all, wanting to play. Or as Socrates said long ago, I am wise because I neither know nor think that I know. I can't be sure, but I wonder, even speculate, that because of all of this, my brain, like the brain of many philosophers and most mystics, now works differently than usual. Instead of getting a dopamine rush when I feel certain, my brain makes me feel better when I question reality, when it's in the fog, in the mist, in the mystery, in the cloud of unknowing. At the end of my CPE class, after everyone had time to get to know me, reluctantly, and we sat in our circle saying our goodbyes, the co-director, a Native American man, no longer said that I see the world pathologically, but called me a heyoka, a Native American term referring to a shaman who lives life backwards, who always does the opposite of everyone else. And I've considered myself a heyoka ever since. And the student who called me arrogant and heartless apologized, with tears in her eyes actually, said she was wrong, that after getting to know me, she realized I was one of the most compassionate people she's ever known. Somehow, in being sure of ourselves and our beliefs, we end up ignoring anything that contradicts what we think we know. Conversely, by admitting we don't know, we become open to others, to other ways, to others' insights. But even then, it's not about knowing. Never really been about knowing. It's been about facing the uncertainty before us, not ignoring them, not disregarding them, not passing them by, pretending that they don't exist. Ignorance is not bliss. Seeking the truth, even if we can never wholly grasp it, even if we can't handle it too much, can fill our lives with wonder and is the basis of all our hope.
Please rise as you're willing and able to sing our final hymn of the morning, number 300, With Heart and Mind.
Our closing words this morning are from Eric Williams. Blessed is the path on which you travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is the gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is the gift that you will become on the journey. May you go forth in peace. Amen. Blessed be. Assalamu alaikum.